She seemed like a helpless pregnant woman in a hospital bed, too weak to fight back. Her silence looked like submission to the husband and his mistress, who entered with a heavy leather belt. But silence isn't always surrender. They forgot that every daughter has a protector. When that buckle struck, it didn't just break a woman, it woke a sleeping giant. You haven't seen true revenge until you've witnessed what a father does when his child screams out. This is the Sterling family scandal, a brutal story of betrayal, violence, and the kind of justice that never waits for a courtroom. The rain in Seattle was relentless that November, battering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Swedish Medical Center. Inside the VIP suite on the fourth floor, the air was sterile, smelling of rubbing alcohol and expensive lilies. Sarah Sterling lay propped up against a mountain of stiff hospital pillows, her hand resting protectively over the heavy swell of her stomach. She was 8 months pregnant, but she looked like a ghost. Her skin was translucent, her blonde hair matted against her forehead, and her eyes, once a vibrant blue, were dull, ringed with the dark exhaustion of a woman who hadn't slept soundly in months. She wasn't just here for preeclampsia. She was here because her body was giving up under the weight of her marriage. Michael Sterling stood by the window, his back to her. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars. He was typing furiously on his phone, the soft click, 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 acting as a metronome for Sarah's rising anxiety. "Michael?" she whispered, her voice raspy. He didn't turn around. "I told you, Sarah. The board meeting is in an hour. If you need water, press the button for the nurse. I'm not an orderly." "It's not water," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm scared. The doctor said my blood pressure is dangerously high. I don't want to be alone tonight." Michael finally turned. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way, jawline like cut glass, eyes that assessed rather than saw. He looked at his wife not with concern, but with the annoyance of a man whose luggage was too heavy. "You are in a $5,000 a night suite, Sarah. You have the best doctors in the Pacific Northwest. You are hardly alone," he sneered, checking his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe. "I have to go. Jessica is handling the merger files, and she needs my signature." The name hung in the air like toxic gas. Jessica. Jessica Vane, Michael's executive assistant. She was 24, sharp as a tack, and possessed a cruelty that masqueraded as ambition. Sarah knew. She had known for 6 months, ever since she found the receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet that never appeared on her own wrist. When she had confronted Michael, he hadn't even denied it. He had simply asked her if she wanted to be a single mother with no income or a wealthy wife who learned to look the other way. "She's coming here, isn't she?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "That's why you're leaving." Michael walked over to the bed. He didn't kiss her. He leaned in, whispering into her ear, "Stop being paranoid. It's pathetic. You're lucky I pay for all this. Don't push your luck, Sarah." He grabbed his coat and walked out without looking back. Sarah watched the heavy oak door close. She felt the vibration of her baby kicking, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was isolated. Her mother had passed 3 years ago. Her friends had slowly drifted away, pushed out by Michael's controlling behavior. And her father? Robert. She hadn't spoken to her father, Robert Callahan, in 2 years. Not since the wedding. Robert was a man of few words, a retired heavy machinery operator from Montana, with calloused hands and a gaze that could peel paint. He had looked at Michael Sterling on the wedding day and told Sarah, "He's got a rot in him, Sarah Bug. I can smell it." Sarah had screamed at him, called him jealous and narrow-minded, and told him to leave. He had left, and he hadn't called since. Now, trapped in this luxury prison, Sarah wished more than anything she could hear his gruff voice. But shame held her throat in a vice. She couldn't let him know he was right. Outside the room, the hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to sleep, unaware that the security guard Michael had promised to hire the one supposed to be standing outside her door had never been hired at all. It was 2 a.m. when the door clicked open. Sarah woke with a start. The room was dim, lit only by the ambient city glow from the window and the blinking green light of the heart monitor. "Michael?" she mumbled, squinting into the shadows. The figure that stepped into the light wasn't Michael. It was a woman. She was wearing a trench coat, wet from the rain, and towering stilettos that clicked ominously on the linoleum floor. She reached up and flipped the light switch. The sudden fluorescent glare blinded Sarah. She threw her hand up to shield her eyes. "Wakey, wakey, Mrs. Sterling," a voice drawled. It was smooth, mocking, and terrifyingly familiar. Sarah's vision cleared. Standing at the foot of her bed was Jessica Vane. Her dark hair was slicked back, her red lipstick perfect. She looked manic, her eyes wide and glittering, with a mix of adrenaline and hatred. "Jessica?" Sarah sat up, clutching the sheets to her chest. "What are you doing here? Where is the nurse? Where is security?" Jessica laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Security? Oh, honey, Michael dismissed the night detail hours ago to save a few bucks. Said you were low risk. And the nurse? I told the station down the hall that I'm your sister, and that you absolutely must not be disturbed for the next 30 minutes, because you finally fell asleep." They were so relieved to get a break. Jessica walked slowly around the side of the bed. She began unbuttoning her trench coat. Underneath, she wore a tight black dress, but it was what she pulled from the pocket of the coat that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. It was a thick, leather belt, a man's belt. Sarah recognized the gold buckle. It was Michael's. "You know," Jessica said conversationally, running the leather through her hands, "Michael talks about you all the time. He says you're a leech. He says he's only waiting until the brat is born to divorce you and take full custody. He says you're unfit." "Get out," Sarah whispered, her heart rate monitor beginning to beep faster. "Beep, beep, beep. I'm calling the police." She reached for the call button on the side of the bed. Jessica moved with the speed of a viper. She lunged forward, slapping Sarah's hand away and ripping the cord out of the wall. The monitor flatlined with a long, angry screech before Jessica silenced the machine with a violent punch to the power button. Silence returned to the room, heavier than before. "No one is coming, Sarah," Jessica hissed, her face inches from Sarah's. "You think you're so special because you're carrying his heir? You're just an incubator, and an ugly one at that." "Please," Sarah sobbed, covering her stomach. "Please, Jessica. The baby. Don't hurt the baby." Jessica's eyes dropped to Sarah's stomach. A look of pure, unadulterated jealousy twisted her features. "That should be my baby. We were supposed to go to Italy this month. But no, he has to stay here, because you got sick. You're ruining everything." Jessica raised the belt. "No!" Sarah screamed, trying to roll off the bed, but the IV lines and her own weight tethered her. The first strike hit her shoulder. It was a sharp, stinging crack that echoed in the small room. Sarah cried out, curling into a fetal position to shield her belly. "Look at you!" Jessica screamed, striking again. This time the leather bit into Sarah's thigh. "Pathetic! Fight back!" "Why don't you fight back?" Crack. The belt buckle grazed Sarah's arm, drawing blood. "Michael hates you!" Jessica shrieked, swinging wildly now. "He wants you dead, he told me." He said, "I wish she would just disappear." Sarah took the blows, sobbing, her mind fracturing. She felt like an animal in a trap. She couldn't breathe. The pain was searing, but the emotional horror was worse. The knowledge that her husband's lover was doing this, perhaps with his permission, in a place of healing. "Please, my father." Sarah gasped between sobs, a desperate prayer. "Your father?" Jessica laughed, breathing heavy, sweat beading on her forehead. She wound the belt around her hand. "That old redneck? What's he going to do? He doesn't even know you're here." Jessica raised her arm for a final, brutal strike, aiming for Sarah's exposed back. Suddenly, the door to the suite didn't just open. It imploded. It burst inward with a thunderous crash, the lock splintering wood across the floor. Jessica froze, her arm still raised. Standing in the doorway, framed by the hallway light, was a figure. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt, oil-stained jeans, and heavy work boots. He was 65 years old, broad-shouldered, with silver hair, and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. It was Robert Callahan. and he was holding a tire iron. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He looked at Sarah, curled up and bleeding. Then he looked at Jessica, holding the belt. His eyes went dead, a cold, terrifying void. "You dropped something," Robert said, his voice a low rumble like an approaching earthquake. Jessica lowered her arm, trembling. Who are you? You can't be in here." Robert stepped into the room. The air pressure seemed to drop. "I'm the father." Jessica Vane was not used to being told no, and she certainly wasn't used to being threatened by men in flannel shirts. She recovered from her initial shock quickly, her arrogance overriding her survival instinct. She was the mistress of Michael Sterling, the future CEO of Sterling Global. She was untouchable. "Get out," she screeched at Robert, brandishing the belt like a whip. "I'll scream. I'll tell them you attacked me. Do you know who my boyfriend is? He owns this hospital wing." Robert didn't blink. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply took a step forward, his heavy work boots landing with a definitive thud that vibrated through the floor. "I don't care who your boyfriend is," Robert said, his voice grating like gravel in a mixer. "But I know who she is." He pointed a callous finger at Sarah, who was shivering uncontrollably on the bed. "That's my daughter, and you just made the last mistake you'll ever make." Jessica, fueled by a toxic mix of panic and entitlement, lashed out. She swung the belt with all her might, aiming for Robert's face. It happened in a blur. Robert didn't flinch. He didn't duck. His hand, thick and scarred from 40 years of working oil rigs and timber lines, shot up and caught the leather strap in mid-air. The belt snapped taut. Jessica gasped, her eyes widening. She tried to yank it back, but it was like trying to pull a root out of concrete. Robert yanked the belt, hard. Jessica flew forward, her high heels skidding on the linoleum. She stumbled right into Robert's personal space. He dropped the tire iron with a clang and grabbed her by the lapels of her expensive trench coat. He literally lifted her off her feet and slammed her against the wall next to the bathroom door. Pictures rattled on the walls. "You like hitting pregnant women?" Robert growled, his face inches from hers. The smell of sawdust and old tobacco on him was overpowering, choking out her expensive perfume. "You feel big? You feel strong? Let me go," Jessica spit, clawing at his hands. Her nails dug into his skin, but he didn't even register the pain. "I ought to throw you out that window," Robert said, and for a terrifying second, Jessica saw in his gray eyes that he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was calculating the trajectory. "Daddy?" Sarah's weak voice cut through the red haze of Robert's rage. "Daddy, please. The baby." Robert froze. The monster inside him, the one that wanted to tear this woman apart limb by limb, receded just enough. He looked at Jessica with pure disgust. "You aren't worth the prison time," he muttered. He shifted his grip, spinning her around. He grabbed the belt she had dropped and, with swift, practiced movements, used it to bind her hands behind her back. He shoved her into the suite's bathroom. "You stay in there and you keep your mouth shut," he ordered. "If I hear one sound, I won't be as polite next time." He slammed the bathroom door and jammed the heavy armchair from the corner under the handle, effectively barricading her inside. Muffled screams and kicks thumped against the wood, but the chair held firm. Robert turned to the bed. The rage vanished from his face, replaced by a heartbreaking tenderness. He walked over and sat on the edge of the mattress. His large, rough hands hovered over Sarah, afraid to touch her, afraid he might break her further. "Sarah Bug," he whispered, his eyes watering. "You came," Sarah sobbed, finally letting go. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his flannel shirt. "It smelled like home. It smelled like safety. I'm sorry, Daddy. You were right. You were right about everything." Robert held her tight, rocking her slightly as she wept. "Hush now. Doesn't matter who was right. Matters that I'm here. I got your text." Sarah pulled back, confused. "Text? I didn't text you. I haven't. I haven't had my phone in days." Michael took it. Robert frowned, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cracked, older model smartphone. He pulled up a message. "Help me. He's going to kill me. Swedish hospital, room 404. Come now. Sarah. Sarah stared at the screen. I didn't send that. Robert looked at the phone, then at the door, his instincts sharpening. If you didn't send it, and Michael certainly didn't send it, then someone else knows what's going on here. Someone wanted me to come. Before they could dwell on the mystery, the heavy oak door to the hallway opened again. Jessica, did you handle it? It was Michael. He walked in, shaking a wet umbrella, looking annoyed. I heard shouting, I hope you didn't make a scene. I told you to just scare her into signing the... Michael stopped. He looked at the empty spot where Jessica should have been. He looked at the armchair wedged against the bathroom door. Finally, his eyes landed on the bed. He saw his battered, crying wife, and then he saw the mountain of a man sitting next to her. Robert slowly stood up. He picked up the tire iron from the floor. Hello, Mikey, Robert said. Michael Sterling was a man who solved problems with money or lawyers. He had never been in a fist fight in his life. He looked at Robert Callahan, a man who looked like he chewed rocks for breakfast, and for the first time in his privileged life, Michael felt the cold grip of mortal terror. Robert, Michael stammered, holding his hands up, his umbrella clattering to the floor. Now, look, let's not be hasty. I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you left your mistress in here to beat my daughter so she'd miscarry, Robert said, walking slowly around the foot of the bed. Is that about the size of it? No, absolutely not. Michael backed up until he hit the door, but Robert had already kicked the doorstop, letting it click shut. Jessica is crazy. She's a stalker. I was trying to protect Sarah. From inside the bathroom, Jessica heard his voice. You liar, she screamed through the door. You told me to do it. You said if I got rid of the baby, we could go to Italy. You gave me the belt, Michael. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael went pale. He looked at Robert, trying to summon his CEO persona. Okay, Robert. Listen, I know you're upset, but think about this. I am a very powerful man. If you touch me, I will sue you into oblivion. I will bury you in legal fees. I will take your house in Montana. I will leave you with nothing. Robert stopped. He tilted his head. My house? He laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. You think I care about a house? Robert asked. You city boys. You think money is the only power in the world. Robert closed the distance. Michael tried to throw a punch, a weak, flailing swing. Robert caught his fist easily. He squeezed. There was a sickening crunch. Michael screamed, dropping to his knees, clutching his crushed hand. My hand! You broke my hand! I'm just getting started, Robert said. This was the unthinkable act. Robert Callahan didn't call the police. He didn't wait for security. He decided, in that moment, to become judge, jury, and executioner. He grabbed Michael by his expensive silk tie and dragged him toward the window. Daddy, don't! Sarah cried out, terrified. You'll go to jail. He owns the cops in this town, Sarah, Robert yelled back, not letting go of Michael. If I call 911 now, his lawyers will be here in 10 minutes. He'll spin it. He'll say, I broke in. He'll say Jessica was defending herself. He'll win. I ain't letting him win. Robert dragged Michael to the chair next to the bed. He shoved him down into it. He took the IV tubing that Jessica had ripped out of the wall earlier and lashed Michael's good hand to the armrest. What are you doing? Michael sobbed, snot running down his face. I'll pay you. I'll give you $1 million. I don't want your money, Robert said. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a roll of duct tape, something he always carried in his work coat. He taped Michael's mouth shut, silencing his pleas. Then, Robert turned to Sarah. Sarah, close your eyes. Daddy, close them. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trembling. Robert picked up the tire iron. He looked at Michael, whose eyes were bulging with horror. You like using belts on women? Robert whispered. You like pain? Robert didn't use the iron. He dropped it. Instead, he unbuckled his own belt. A heavy, thick leather strip, worn soft by years of hard labor. I'm going to teach you a lesson about pain, boy. And every time you look at yourself in the mirror for the rest of your miserable life, you're going to remember the name Callahan. Robert raised his arm. The beating that followed was methodical. It wasn't a frenzy, it was a discipline. Robert struck Michael across the legs, across the shins, across the thighs. He avoided the head. He didn't want to kill him. He wanted to break his spirit. He wanted to dismantle the arrogance that lived in his bones. Michael tried to scream against the tape, thrashing in the chair, but he was pinned. Tears streamed down his face. After 10 strikes, Robert stopped. He was breathing hard. Michael was slumped in the chair, whimpering, his expensive suit trousers torn, his ego shattered. Robert leaned in close to Michael's ear. Now comes the real punishment. Robert walked over to Michael's discarded suit jacket. He fished out Michael's phone. He grabbed Michael's face and forced it in front of the screen to unlock it with Face ID. "You're a tech guy, right, Michael?" Robert muttered, tapping through the apps. "You like social media?" Robert opened the Instagram app on Michael's phone. The Sterling Global account had 2.5 million followers. It was Michael's pride and joy. Robert hit Go Live. He propped the phone up on the bedside table, facing the room. He ripped the tape off Michael's mouth. "Say hello to your investors, Michael," Robert said grimly. Michael looked at the phone. The viewer count skyrocketed instantly. 500, 2,000, 10,000. "Help me!" Michael screamed at the phone. "He's crazy! He's killing me!" Robert stepped into the frame. He looked straight into the camera. "My name is Robert Callahan," he said clearly, to the thousands of people watching live. "This man is Michael Sterling. He hired his mistress." Robert walked over and kicked the chair away from the bathroom door, yanking it open to reveal a sobbing, bound Jessica, to beat his 8-month pregnant wife with a belt so he wouldn't have to pay child support. The comments on the screen were flying by so fast they were a blur. "Oh my God, is this real? Look at Sarah. Look at the blood. Tell them it's a lie, Michael," Robert roared, grabbing Michael by the collar. Michael looked at the camera. He looked at Jessica. He looked at the ruin of his life. Michael choked. I just wanted a divorce." "And the fraud?" Robert pressed. "This was the gamble, the twist. Tell them about the pension fund, Michael." Sarah's eyes snapped open. "What?" Robert looked at his daughter. "Why do you think he needed the merger, Sarah? He stole from the employee pension fund. He's broke. He's been trying to buy my land in Montana because there's lithium under it. That's why he married you. To get to me." Michael's face went white. "How? How do you know that?" "I told you," Robert growled at the camera, which was now broadcasting to 50,000 people, including news outlets. "I ain't just a redneck. I read the contracts you sent me, and I hired a private investigator 6 months ago." Robert looked into the lens one last time. "Police are on the way," Robert said, "but the court of public opinion is already in session." He ended the stream. The room was silent, save for the distant sound of sirens approaching. Michael slumped in the chair, a broken man. His career was over. His reputation was incinerated. Robert walked back to Sarah, his hands shaking slightly, now that the adrenaline was fading. He brushed a hair from her forehead. "It's over, baby girl," he said softly. The unthinkable part wasn't the beating. It was letting the world see him for what he really is. But as the sirens got louder, Sarah grabbed Robert's arm, her face contorted in a sudden, sharp pain that had nothing to do with her injuries. "Daddy," she gasped, clutching her stomach. "The water. My water just broke." The sirens cut off abruptly outside, replaced by the thundering of boots in the hallway. The room was a tableau of absolute madness. Michael Sterling taped to a chair and sobbing. Jessica Vane barricaded in a bathroom, screaming for a lawyer. Robert standing protectively over his daughter, and Sarah gripping the sheets, her face contorted in the agony of sudden transition labor. "Freeze! Police!" 3 officers burst into the room, guns drawn. They took in the scene, the blood on the floor, the tire iron, the bound man. Their training kicked in, but their assessment was wrong. They saw the big man in the flannel shirt, standing over the weeping man in the suit. "Hands in the air! Now! Get down on your knees!" the lead officer shouted, aiming his Glock at Robert's chest. "Daddy!" Sarah shrieked, a contraction ripping through her. "Don't shoot him! He saved me!" Robert didn't resist. He slowly raised his hands, his face calm. I'm unarmed, he said, his voice steady. The weapon is on the floor. I'm complying. Just get a doctor for my daughter. She's in labor. Get down. The officer didn't want to hear it. Two of them rushed Robert, forcing him to his knees and wrenching his arms behind his back. The sound of handcuffs clicking tight was harsh in the sterile room. Get the victim loose, the sergeant barked, pointing at Michael. An officer rushed to Michael, cutting the tape on his wrists. Michael, sensing his moment, immediately launched into a performance. Thank God, he's crazy. He broke in. He assaulted my wife. He broke my hand. Look at my hand, Michael wailed, cradling his crushed fingers. Arrest him. I want him buried. You lying son of a Robert lunged, but the officers held him back. Get him out of here, the sergeant ordered. No, Sarah screamed, trying to sit up. He's lying. Michael hired her. Check the bathroom. Check the live stream. Just then, a team of nurses and an obstetrician, Dr. Evans, pushed past the police blockade. Dr. Evans took one look at the monitors and Sarah's pale, sweat-drenched face. Everyone shut up, Dr. Evans commanded, her voice cutting through the testosterone in the room. She checked Sarah. She's fully dilated. The baby is in distress. The heart rate is plummeting. We have a prolapsed cord. We don't have time to move her to the OR. We have to do this here, now. The room shifted from a crime scene to a battlefield of life and death. I'm not leaving her, Robert shouted, as the cops tried to drag him out. That's my girl. I'm not leaving her with him. He jerked his head toward Michael. Dr. Evans looked at the police sergeant. If you take him out, she's going to panic, and her blood pressure will stroke her out. Handcuff him to the radiator if you have to, but let him stay. Get the husband out. He's the agitation trigger. This is my hospital, Michael sputtered, his face purple. You can't. Get him out, the sergeant said, finally sensing the dynamic in the room. He grabbed Michael by his good arm. Sir, step outside. As Michael was dragged out, shouting threats of lawsuits, Robert was shoved into the corner. The officer handcuffed one of his wrists to the heavy metal rail of the window guard. Don't move, the officer warned. Robert nodded, ignoring him. His eyes were locked on Sarah. Breathe, Sarah Bug. Just like we practiced when you fell off that horse when you were 12. Focus on me. Look at me. Sarah was gasping, terror in her eyes. It hurts, Daddy. Something's wrong. Nothing is wrong, Robert lied, his voice projecting strength he didn't feel. You're a Callahan. You're made of steel. Push. The next 10 minutes were a blur of medical commands, the beeping of alarms, and Sarah's guttural cries. The prolapsed cord meant the baby's oxygen was cut off. They had seconds to get the infant out before brain damage or worse occurred. Dr. Evans worked with terrifying efficiency. Vacuum. Now, Sarah. On the next contraction, you have to give me everything. If he doesn't come out, we're cutting you open right here without anesthesia. Do you understand? Sarah nodded weakly. Now, push, Sarah screamed, a sound that tore at Robert's heart. He strained against the handcuffs, the metal biting into his wrist, wishing he could take the pain for her. Come on, Sarah, Robert roared. Bring him home. With one final, earth-shattering effort, Sarah collapsed back onto the pillows. Silence filled the room. Dr. Evans held up a small, slick, purple body. The baby wasn't moving. The baby wasn't crying. Code blue, NICU, to room 404, a nurse said into her headset, her voice flat. Is he? Sarah whispered, too weak to lift her head. Why isn't he crying? Robert felt his knees buckle. He slumped against the wall. Not after all this. Please, God, not after all this. The team moved the baby to the warmer in the corner. They began chest compressions with 2 fingers. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. The seconds stretched into hours. Michael's muffled shouting could be heard from the hallway. The police officers in the room looked at their boots, uncomfortable. Then, a cough. A sputtering, wet cough. And then, a wail. Thin at first, then angry. A lusty, furious cry that announced to the world, I am here, and I am a fighter. Sarah burst into tears. Robert let out a breath that sounded like a sob, dropping his head against the wall. "He's okay," Dr. Evans said, checking the vitals. "He's a little small, but he's pinking up. He's okay." She wrapped the baby in a blanket and walked over to Sarah, placing the bundle on her chest. "You have a son, Sarah," Dr. Evans said softly. Sarah kissed the baby's head, mixing her tears with the blood and sweat on his skin. She looked over at the corner, where her father was handcuffed, like a common criminal. "Daddy," she whispered. "Look," Robert smiled, tears streaming down his weathered face. "He's beautiful, Sarah. He looks just like you." The touching moment was broken by the sergeant. "Robert Callahan, you're under arrest for aggravated assault and kidnapping. You have the right to remain silent." Robert turned around and presented his free hand to be cuffed. He didn't fight. He looked at the officer with a calm dignity. "I didn't kidnap anyone," Robert said. "I just took out the trash." The fall of the House of Sterling was swift, brutal, and televised. Robert Callahan's arrest didn't last long. The assault on a billionaire headline ran for exactly 3 hours before the internet got hold of the live stream recording. A tech-savvy nurse had screen-recorded the Instagram Live before Michael's PR team could scrub it. By the time Robert was being processed at the Seattle downtown precinct, the video had 12 million views on X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok. The hashtag number #TireIronDad was trending worldwide. The video was damning. It showed everything: the belt in Jessica's hand, Michael's confession about the fraud, and his callous admission that he wanted the baby gone. Day 3. The hospital room. Sarah sat in a private recovery room, this time with a real police guard at the door, stationed there for her protection, not her imprisonment. The door opened, and a woman in a sharp navy suit walked in. It was Eleanor Vance, the toughest defense attorney in Washington state. She had volunteered to represent Robert pro bono. "How is he?" Sarah asked immediately, adjusting the baby, whom she had named Ethan Robert Sterling. "He's out," Eleanor said with a smile. "The district attorney dropped the kidnapping charges this morning. They're keeping the assault charge for now as a formality, but with the defense of others statute and the video evidence, no jury in America will convict him. He's a free man." Sarah let out a long sigh of relief. "And Michael?" Eleanor's expression turned grimly satisfied. "That's the better news. The SEC raided Sterling Global Headquarters yesterday. Based on what Robert forced Michael to admit on the live stream, they found the cooked books. He stole $40 million from the pension fund to cover bad crypto investments. He's finished? He's destroyed. But the cherry on top? Jessica Vane. "What about her?" Sarah asked, a shiver running down her spine. She realized Michael was going to throw her under the bus. She turned state's witness yesterday. She handed over text messages, emails, voicemails, everything. She has proof Michael planned the attack. She has proof he bought the belt. Michael is looking at 20 years for conspiracy to commit murder, plus another 15 for the financial fraud. Sarah looked down at Ethan. He was safe. They were safe. Day 7. The reunion. Robert walked into the hospital room. He looked tired. He was wearing the same flannel shirt, now washed, and he had a fresh bandage on his hand, where he'd cut it hitting Michael. He stopped at the door, suddenly shy. The media had been calling him a hero for a week. Strangers had started a GoFundMe for his legal fees that had already reached $500,000, which he kept trying to return. But here, in front of his daughter, he just felt like a dad who had almost been too late. "Hey, Sarah Bug," he rumbled. "Here," Sarah said, holding out the baby. "He wants to meet his grandpa." Robert approached cautiously. His hands, capable of crushing a man's hand and swinging a tire iron with lethal force, trembled as he reached out. He took the bundle. Ethan was tiny against Robert's chest. The baby opened his eyes, blue, just like Sarah's, and stared up at the giant holding him. "Hi there, little man," Robert whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry about the mess. We'll get it cleaned up." "You saved us," Sarah said, reaching out to squeeze Robert's arm. "I was so stupid, Dad. I pushed you away for a monster." "You fell in love," Robert said, sitting in the chair, not the one Michael had been tied to, but a new one. "Love makes us blind sometimes. But you woke up when it mattered. You fought for him. He nodded at the baby. I filed for divorce this morning, Sarah said, and I petitioned for a name change. I don't want him to be a Sterling. I want him to be a Callahan. Robert looked down at the baby, hiding the pride swelling in his chest. Ethan Callahan. Sounds like a good name. Sounds like a man who knows the value of hard work. Dad? Yeah, honey? Can we go home? To Montana? I don't want to be in the city anymore. I want Ethan to grow up where he can see the stars. Robert smiled, a genuine, crinkly-eyed smile that took 10 years off his face. I already gassed up the truck, he said. We leave as soon as the doctors say go. But the drama wasn't quite over. As they packed Sarah's bag the next day, a nurse came in with a strange expression. Mrs. Sterling. I mean, Miss Callahan? There's a visitor. He says he's Michael's father. Big Michael Sterling Sr. Sarah froze. Michael's father was a recluse, a billionaire who lived in the Hamptons. He was the one man Michael feared more than anyone. He had never approved of Michael, but he had never intervened either. Send him in, Robert said, standing up and crossing his arms. An old man walked in. He used a cane, but he moved with power. He was dressed in a suit that looked like it was from the 1920s. He ignored Robert and looked straight at Sarah. My son is a fool, the old man said. His voice was like dry paper, and a criminal. He has disgraced our name. I know, Sarah said coldly. I saw the video, the old man continued. He looked at the baby. Is that him? The heir? He's not an heir to anything of yours, Robert interjected. He's a Callahan. The old man chuckled. It was a dry, rattling sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the table. I have dissolved the family trust. Michael gets nothing. I have transferred the remaining liquid assets of the family estate after the SEC fines into a trust for the boy. It's about $10 million. Consider it. An apology for my failure to raise a man. He turned to leave. At the door, he stopped and looked at Robert. You have a good swing, Mr. Callahan. I always told Michael his jaw was his weak point. With that, the patriarch of the Sterling Empire walked out, leaving his legacy in the hands of the woman his son had tried to destroy. 5 years later, the sun did not simply rise over the Bitterroot Valley of Montana. It conquered the sky. It spilled like molten gold over the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Sapphire Mountains, flooding the valley floor with a light so clear and sharp it felt like it could cut glass. The air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the faint, sweet musk of sagebrush. It was a world away from the sterile, antiseptic smell of the Swedish Medical Center in Seattle, a world that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime entirely. Robert Callahan sat on the wraparound porch of the log cabin he had built with his own 2 hands 30 years ago. He was 70 now. The years had taken their toll in the stiffness of his knees and the deep grooves etched around his eyes, but he was still a mountain of a man. He wore his flannel shirt not as a costume, but as a second skin, rolled up to reveal forearms that still looked like they were carved from oak. He wrapped his calloused fingers around a steaming mug of black coffee, the ceramic warm against the morning chill, and watched the small, energetic figure running through the tall, dew-soaked grass in the paddock. Grandpa, watch this. I'm gonna get it this time. Ethan Callahan, 5 years old and sturdy as a young ox, was trying to lasso a fence post. He was a miniature replica of the men who came before him, blonde hair falling into eyes, the color of a summer sky, a jawline that was already showing the stubborn set of the Callahan clan. He swung the stiff rope with intense, tongue-biting concentration. He threw it with all his might. The loop sailed through the air, wobbled, and fell short, landing in the dirt 3 feet from the post. Robert chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in his chest. Keep your elbow up, little man, he called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. You're using too much shoulder. It's all in the wrist. Let the rope do the work. The screen door behind him creaked open, the rusty spring singing a familiar song. Sarah stepped out onto the porch. She looked nothing like the ghost who had lain in that hospital bed terrorized and broken. The woman standing there now was vibrant, alive. Her skin was bronzed from the high-altitude sun, her blonde hair was tied back in a messy, practical ponytail that swayed as she walked, and she wore oil-stained jeans and work boots that had seen miles of hard terrain. She carried a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon, the steam rising into the cold air. "He's been out there since 6 in the morning," Sarah said, sitting on the porch swing next to her father. The chains groaned softly under her weight. "He's obsessed. I tried to get him to eat, but he said cowboys don't eat until the herd is secure." "He's a Callahan," Robert said simply, taking a sip of his coffee. "We don't know how to quit. It's a blessing and a curse." Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes, but her gaze drifted to the folded newspaper resting on the wooden table between them. Even out here, where the internet was spotty and the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, the news eventually traveled. The fate of the conspirators. It had been 5 years since the live stream of the century, as the media had dubbed it. The legal fallout had been a slow-motion car crash that the entire country had watched with bated breath, a spectacle of justice that was as brutal as it was necessary. Michael Sterling was no longer the master of the universe. He was currently inmate number 89402 at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. He wasn't in the general population. He wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes among men who had mothers and sisters they loved. He was in protective custody, which was a polite term for solitary confinement. He spent 23 hours a day in a 6x8 concrete box, staring at a steel toilet and a slit of a window that showed only a patch of gray sky. The trial had been the theater of his destruction, presided over by Judge Anthony Moretti, a jurist known for his icy demeanor and utter disdain for white-collar criminals who thought their wallets put them above the law. The proceedings had stripped Michael of every shred of dignity. Michael's high-priced legal team, costing thousands of dollars an hour, had tried everything. They pleaded insanity, claiming the stress of the impending merger had caused a temporary psychotic break. But the prosecution had a weapon no lawyer could parry: the video. They played it again and again in the courtroom. The sound of Michael's voice, clear and arrogant, admitting he wanted his unborn son gone. The sight of the belt in Jessica's hand, the terror in Sarah's eyes. Judge Moretti's sentencing remarks had been printed in every major newspaper. Robert remembered them by heart. "Mr. Sterling, you were given every privilege the world has to offer. You were given wealth, education, and status, and you used them to build a cage for your wife and a weapon for your child. You are not insane, sir. You are simply evil. I sentence you to 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, to be served consecutively with 15 years for securities fraud. You will be an old man, forgotten and alone, before you see the open sky again." And Jessica Vane? Fate had been perhaps even crueler to her. She had avoided prison by turning state's witness, betraying the man she had conspired with. But in doing so, she had ensured she would never have a life. She was a pariah. Her face was known globally as the face of betrayal. She had been doxxed, hounded, and spat upon in the streets. Eventually, she had been forced to legally change her name and vanish. Rumor had it she was living in a trailer park in rural Nebraska, working the graveyard shift at a truck stop diner, forever looking over her shoulder, terrified that one day a customer would look up from their coffee and recognize the mistress with the belt. The legacy of the blood money. "You thinking about him?" Robert asked, noticing the shadow that crossed Sarah's face as she looked at the paper. "Not him," Sarah said, shaking her head. "I was thinking about the money and what we're doing today." Michael's father, the reclusive billionaire patriarch, had passed away 6 months after Ethan was born. True to his final, spiteful word to his son, he had dissolved the family trust. Michael got nothing. The remaining liquid assets of the Sterling estate, after the massive SEC fines, were paid amounted to $10 million. It had all been transferred into a trust for Ethan. Sarah hadn't touched a dime of it for herself. She hadn't bought a mansion in the Hamptons or a yacht in the Mediterranean. She viewed it as blood money, tainted by the sins of the sterling name, but Robert had convinced her that money was just a tool, like a hammer or a shovel. It depended on whose hand held it. So, they used it to build something beautiful. "The Callahan house," she said softly, looking toward the newly renovated structure that sat a quarter-mile down the drive. 2 years ago, Sarah and Robert had used half the trust fund to convert the ranch's massive, derelict bunkhouse into a state-of-the-art sanctuary for women escaping domestic violence. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a fortress, hidden by the mountains, protected by Robert and his crew of loyal ranch hands. It was a place where women could come to heal. They didn't just sit in therapy circles, they learned to ride horses. They learned to fix engines. They learned to chop wood. They learned that their bodies were capable of strength, not just pain. "We got a new arrival coming today," Sarah said, checking her watch. "A girl from Portland. Her husband is a high-powered defense attorney. She's terrified. She thinks no one can touch him because he knows the law." Robert took a long sip of his coffee, savoring the bitterness. He looked down at his knuckles, scarred and weathered from a lifetime of labor. "She'll learn different here," he rumbled. "Out here, the law is simple. You don't hurt women, you don't hurt kids, and if you do, there's nowhere to hide." The final lesson. Down in the paddock, a shout of triumph broke the morning quiet. "I got it, Grandpa. I got it." Ethan was jumping up and down, the dust puffing around his boots. The rope was successfully looped around the fence post, pulled taut. Robert set his coffee down on the railing. He stood up, his shadow stretching long and dark across the porch planks. He walked down the wooden steps, his boots crunching rhythmically on the gravel, and knelt next to his grandson. He didn't just pat the boy on the head, he pulled him into a hug, fierce and protective, smelling of flannel and sawdust. "You did good, Ethan," Robert said, looking the boy in the eye. "You kept trying. That's what matters." "I caught the bad guy," Ethan said proudly, pointing at the fence post. Robert smiled, but his expression turned serious. He adjusted the collar of Ethan's shirt. "But remember what I told you, son. Why do we learn to use the rope? Why do we learn to be strong?" Ethan looked up, his blue eyes wide and serious, mimicking his grandfather's gravity. "To catch things that are running away?" "No," Robert corrected him gently, his voice thick with emotion. "We use the rope to hold on to the things that matter, to keep them safe. And we get strong so we can stop the things that try to hurt them. Strength isn't for hurting people, Ethan. It's for protecting them. Do you understand?" "I understand, Grandpa," Ethan whispered. Robert looked up at the porch. Sarah was watching them, bathed in the golden morning light. She was smiling, tears glistening in her eyes. She was safe. She was free. And for the first time in a long time, she was truly happy. Robert stood up, his knees cracking, and looked out at the majestic sweep of the mountains. He had spent his life moving earth and breaking stone. He had thought that physical power was what made a man. But as he watched his daughter and grandson, he realized the tire iron wasn't his greatest act of strength. His greatest strength wasn't violence. His greatest strength was simply showing up when they called. "Come on," Robert said, lifting Ethan easily onto his shoulders. "Grandma's got breakfast ready, and then we have work to do. There are people coming who need our help, and a Callahan never turns away a friend in need." They walked back toward the house, 3 generations of Callahans, leaving the ghosts of the past to fade into the dirt behind them. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the Sterling Scandal. It is a story that reminds us of a terrifying truth. Monsters don't always hide under beds or in dark alleyways. Sometimes they wear Italian bespoke suits, run Fortune 500 companies, and sleep right beside you. But it is also a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear flannel shirts, drive beat-up trucks, and carry a tire iron. Robert Callahan didn't just save his daughter's life that night in Seattle. He exposed a moral rot that was destroying an entire family. He proved that no amount of money, influence, or power can protect you when a father's love is pushed past its breaking point. This story forces us to ask a difficult question. What would you have done if you were Robert? Would you have waited for the police to arrive, risking your daughter's life? Or would you have taken matters into your own hands to ensure her safety? I want to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more people who need to hear these stories. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. We drop new true crime dramas and real-life thrillers every week, and you do not want to miss the next one.